So I'm here to tell you the story of DataMarket, my startup, in 5 charts. I thought that was a fitting way to do it. So first of all, for a little bit of a context for those of you that are not local, I think most of the Icelanders in this room will probably know the story. DataMarket was a startup founded in 2008 and was sold last year to a BI company called Click, which is one of the leading BI companies in data discovery and actually in BI in the world today. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that journey through a few charts. Actually, interestingly enough, all the charts I'm going to show you are charts that we tracked daily, weekly, or monthly throughout the history of DataMarket, and they were visible to our entire staff. So what you're basically seeing is a little bit into what they saw. There's one exception, and I will talk about that. So this is the first chart. So what you read from this chart is obviously a very smooth story. We started out in Iceland with only Icelandic users back in 2009. Grew slowly there, kind of using Iceland as a test market. We actually did our launch over here, increased the user base, learned from the Icelandic story, launched internationally over here, and then smoothly, obviously, through a very methodological way of kind of doing things, things grew, and we ended up being acquired. This is a lie. And actually, all the stories that you hear of that sort are a lie. No startup journey is ever like that. But that's what you can read from this chart. I will actually tell you an interesting thing about this chart. We thought when we started this was the most important metric to track. How many registered users we would have, because the initial way we were going to go to market with DataMarket essentially was collecting data, statistical data and numerical data about the world. And we were going to make that available in an easier format, collect it and make it available to business users in an easy format. Our naive theory about how we would productize this would that people would come to our website, they would find the useful data there, they would pay with their credit card, and we would, we would make a good business out of that. We would have high volume, low cost users in a kind of enterprise environment. Lots of wrong assumptions in that story. I won't go through all of them here, but in short, that didn't work out. We still tracked this, and we still had our open website out there where people could log in. They could look up all sorts of things. There actually wasn't a lot of reasons to register, so we were sometimes surprised how high these numbers got, because we had 100 times more visitors than we ever had people registering. So this chart that we initially thought was the most important thing to track is pretty much useless. And the smooth story that it tells you pretty much nothing about the business. What we ended up being successful at was licensing the technology to other companies that were publishing their own data and doing things in a very different way. That's not measured in this chart. So that's the first chart. The second chart is the number of employees. So we start out over here, where it's basically, this is back in 2009. This is basically me and Gulli, for those of you that know him. Then we added Borgar and Thorri. So, then it kind of goes on. We had a summer employee. They left. Kind of, I could go through every single kind of little thing on this chart and tell you what's happening. There are definitely interesting stories there. The takeaway from this chart. So, if the takeaway from the first chart was, there's never such a thing as a smooth startup story. Overnight success usually takes 7 years, and people go almost bankrupt at least twice on the way. The takeaway from this chart is, make sure that you start off with the absolutely best people that you can get, because I have enormous respect for the people that I was so lucky to get with me early on in this journey. And they are very much the reason that the rest of the people that we got on board were so qualified as well, because good people want to work with good people. Rule number 1, when it comes to kind of, rules of success, work with smart people. That's basically here. What you see here, and that's kind of a really big part of the success that we had. So there are other things you can read from this. For example, that we basically, when it came here to kind of mid 2013, we were going out. We were seeking funding. We basically stopped expanding and decided to wait with more hires until we we got that funding landed. And I will tell you a little bit more about kind of the story after that point in time after that. But the takeaway here, work with smart people, that's the first step to anything. This chart here, I'm actually cheating a little bit. So I told you I was going to tell the story in 5 charts. I broke one out into 3, so there are actually 7. This is part 2 of the same chart as before. Number of shareholders, I founded the company together with Frosty, who was the chairman of the company to begin with, so that's the 2 of us. We got a great group of angel investors, some of whom are here in the room with us, 5 of them to be exact, so that brought the number of shareholders up to 7 in 2009. The same group with a couple of additions came in 2011. Also, some of the early employees used their stock options, so they became shareholders. Some of our shareholders actually formed the company together, so it shrunk. Then over here, we have a round of funding, but Frumtak actually invests, and that's when they come in, and we got 1 new investor in that round as well. Then basically the other 2 steps can be explained with stock options on the one hand, and actually one of our shareholders divorced. So his shares were split between him and his wife. So that's kind of increased the shareholder count as well. Then on the 23rd of October last year, the number of shareholders shrunk down to 1. And that's not me. So that's when we sold the company. So combining this with the chart before is a little bit interesting, because what you will notice is that for a long time in the beginning, we had more shareholders than employees. The takeaway from that combined chart to me is, if the takeaway from the employee chart was work with smart people, the takeaway from the shareholder chart and this chart is surround yourself with talented people and smart people. I value the mentorship and the advice that we got from these early investors, all of whom were investors that have founded companies and actually built them up and sold them internationally before I did. I value that way more than I value their money, even though I value their money a lot as well. That was a very big part of kind of getting through this story. So yeah, then it's not until, what is it, 2013? Oh, sorry, 2013 that we kind of concretely have more employees than shareholders. All right. So next chart. This chart is relatively new. So this is not one of all of the other charts. You will actually even see that they are in our software. So we were eating our own dog food, tracking things about our business in our own software. This, however, is made in the great software called Excel. I was bored one night and I decided I've held a list of my to done for many years. Basically, it's a to-do list, and I track the things that I check off every single day. I went back through that list, and I was looking at kind of recurring themes throughout the months that I was starting and running DataMarket, and broke it down into, coarsely into 5 categories: financing and corporate development, sales, marketing and PR, product and vision, and then the administration stuff, HR, finance, and so on. A lot of really interesting things that you can read from this, and I don't believe my story is unique here. First of all, you see a lot of emphasis in the beginning on product and vision. You quickly run out of time to do that, at least if you don't plan for it really well. So there are at times here throughout history where we go through, or I go through, months without spending significant time on these things. That's probably not good. You have to plan for that. You have to make sure that doesn't happen. You will also see a lot of blue. Blue is finance and corporate dev. You can actually point to 3, we can always say pockets of blue here. This is the first series round of, this is the first round of angel funding. This is the second round of angel funding. It was easier. It was the same people. We were doing well, so it was easy. This is the funding we got from Frumtak, and we obviously talked to other investors in that process. So that took a significant chunk of time. Now here then we go through kind of preparing for the Series A and kind of basically we started actively going for the Series A down here. I started reaching out to investors, mainly in the US, meeting with them. We had a track, we had a pipeline at some point of about 60 different VC investors, got pretty far with about 10 of them, and then kind of progressed. I would say there were 3 in December 2013. There were 3 that were very likely. We had 1 term sheet on the table for a funding of about $4.2 million. When a partnership discussion with Click, this BI company, quickly took a turn, an interesting turn, they offered to acquire us. And for that, they wanted exclusive rights for talks while we were doing that, so we weren't chasing after a funding round at the same time. So this is basically here. We've been spending the summer and a lot of time there kind of going through the VC part, and then we start that part. And actually, I would say, if there was a third category here, if this was turned into a comma, and I would add the word here, capital controls would be what it would say over here. Because a lot of this time, from here to here, was spent on capital controls, the central bank, and actually just hand-holding with an international investor that is not, should we say, at comfort or at ease with words like capital controls and having to go and jump through special hoops at the central bank and so on. I got actually, so there were several quite experienced corp dev people involved in the process that had worked at bigger companies. They simply said, one of them had worked at one of the big IT companies in the US in corp dev, and they simply said, we would have walked away in week 2. Just too weird, too strange. But not Click, so they went through it, and we have a pretty good thing going for us now. Actually, coming to that, wow, yeah, this chart. This is actually the most interesting chart. So the takeaway from the chart before, be prepared to spend things on, well, you spend a lot of time on different things, and funding is going to be a big one. The takeaway from this chart, so this is my favorite one. So this is the money we had in our bank account week by week throughout the history of the company. So, founded it with little money over here. Then we had the 2 rounds of angel funding that we've talked about, the funding from the FrimTech funding round. Then actually we started having some customers, and they started paying us, and that was nice. And you have the periodical, basically these are quarterly payments from our biggest contract, and so on. So that's kind of the history here. And remember, this was tracked, this was live. Everybody could see this at any time. The takeaway from this chart is don't run out of money. And that's a very important lesson. I actually know for a fact that at least at some point, the executive MBA at Harvard Business School, the first day is all about don't run out of money. And it seems like a very obvious rule, but even at that level, it has to be taught. The biggest lesson to me here was you see this here. This is the 0 line. And at the end, we're going through negotiations. We are kind of, we are making sure that people see the value in us and so on. And we don't have a lot of money because we didn't have the funding round up here when we were kind of planning it, and when we actually had the term sheet on the table. So in hindsight, it would have been a good move to take a little funding round in here so that we had more of a war chest to be able to say, hey, we have enough money to kind of run through this. The bank was willing to give us an overdraft of a little bit, but you can see how the line flattens off here. That only lasted for about a month or 2. And basically, fortunately, we had good investors that were willing to step in here at the end. So in the end, we sold the company for $13.5 million, but as you can see, we didn't have a lot in the bank. So there's a big difference. There's always a thin line between kind of running out of money and delivering value. And then finally, the fun chart. So this is the takeaway from this chart is kind of life still happens. And this is the number of children that were born to employees at DataMarket throughout the history, 10 of them in total. And the takeaway here is I think you can talk to any DataMarket employee and they will say, we're not in crunch mode the entire time. We may have had I actually think I can say we had 3 crunch mode periods where we were 2 weeks or more of really dedicated work, kind of going through deliveries and so on. And actually the 4th one is going on right now because on Friday we have to deliver the integrated product to into the product of our investors or our acquirers. So there's definitely a crunch now. But we were, I think, pretty good, at least for a startup, to keep it at a kind of relatively calm pace and making sure that life still happened while we were going through it. So that's my history of DataMarket in 5/7 charts.